In this one, I wanted to talk about the core problem of ideology. And so, one of the questions that we could ask is why is it that every ideology can be more or less justified? So, all competing ideologies, doesn't matter what they are, you can make arguments for and against them, and they all appear equally legitimate. Okay? So, the problem here is much greater. The issue itself is that ideology itself is the mechanism that produces legitimacy. Okay? So how does that ideology work? Every ideology gives you a framework through which the world becomes intelligible. Okay? It tells you what's right and wrong, who is friend and who is enemy, what counts as truth, what counts as falsity. And then within that ideology, everything makes sense. But from outside, when you step outside of it, it looks arbitrary. And so that's the trap. So when you're inside it, you can't see how arbitrary your ideologies are. And when you're outside it, you can't see why the ideology is important. So let's compare so when you compare two ideologies, liberalism, capitalism, Christianity, Islam, capitalism, socialism, so they all appear to be equally legitimate. And each one creates its own standards for legitimacy. And so in this way, they are self-justifying systems. Okay? You can't, like, one doesn't lose to the other because of argument, because the terms of the argument itself are already defined by ideology. And so this is why you have thinkers like Marx, Nietzsche, Lacan, who treat ideology not as a set of ideas, but as the unconscious structure that organizes desire, authority, and meaning. So to step out of ideology is not to find the true worldview because it just doesn't exist. It's to realize that every worldview carries with it its own blind spots, its own exclusion, and its own violence. And so the problem is not it is not like it's not simply that it's relative, okay? And it's not as if like ideologies are all equally valid. The problem is that ideology manufactures that validity. So this fight between ideologies is not a contest of equally valid claims. It's a clash of systems of meanings, each convinced of its own truth. Okay? And each is blind to the fact that its own truth is only true within its own framework. Okay. So like let's get rid of this like illusion of neutrality. Okay? And so neutrality is this kind of like it's the most insidious form of ideology. The moment an ideology stops representing itself as one among many and instead declares to be reality, that's when it has the most control. So, so liberal democracy today does this exactly. It doesn't call itself ideology. It calls itself freedom, progress, human rights. And so it insists it's not a worldview, but it's simply like the rules of the game. It's the baseline. So it insists it's the baseline by which all other ideologies are judged, right? And that's this idea of dominance. It doesn't argue. It doesn't plead. It doesn't it simply frames itself as the natural background of existence. It assumes itself. And this is how power works when it's matured, right? So raw ideology declares itself as I am communism, I am Catholicism, I am nationalism. Okay? But advanced forms of ideology, and this is like liberal democracy, so it erases its own fingerprints. It tells you there's no ideology here. This is just common sense, and any rational person can see this. See, and so that's how it buries itself inside of language, inside of morality, and inside the way we think about ourselves. This is why the claim that other ideologies are equally legitimate, like it feels dangerous to the reigning ideology. Because if every ideology is just one possible structure of meaning, then liberal democracy, capitalism, and whatever hegemony reigns in a given time period is not destiny. It's just another system that can be overturned. And that thinking is exactly the kind of thought the system needs to get rid of. Okay? So it's not the issue is not that all ideologies are equally legitimate. The issue is that the dominant ideology convinces you there are no alternatives. And it forces you to see rival worldviews as primitive, irrational, or fanatical. This is why the collapse of belief in one ideology feels as like it feels like a crack in reality itself. Because you don't just disagree with it, you actually lose the ground under your feet. You lose reality itself. Okay? And this is why ideology is never just false ideas. It's the unconscious frame that determines what reality even looks like. Right? You don't step into it by debating it. Because it collapses only when history, desire, or crisis tears holes in that fabric, and it forces you to see that it was invisible. Okay, so you don't get to ideology by standing outside of it. You don't get some like pure position outside of ideology. Every human being is caught in what the psychoanalysts would say as the symbolic order, right? A set of narratives or categories that tells them who they are, or tells you who you are, and what life means, right? So in the West, we have this illusion of neutrality, right? In the West, we have democracy, human rights, and progress, but these aren't framed as ideology. They're framed as reality itself, as the very ground of what it is we're doing, right? So that's why any dissent against that can't be debated on equal grounds. It's either like medicalized, so it's like you're an extremist. You have extremist psychology. You're criminalized. It's terrorism, okay? Or it's just dismissed as complete and utter madness, as just completely irrelevant. And so in this way, the dominant ideology never argues; it just delegitimizes, because it can't treat a rival as a rival; it has to treat it as a disease. So if we look at like the modern kind of ideas of this, right? You've got Charlie Kirk, you've got Ben Shapiro, you've got all of these online personalities. Okay, so what happens is that you have to take on the ideology, and anything against that ideology is antagonistic. So what you're doing is you're putting yourself in a frame of antagonism with everything else that's competing against it. Okay, so so in the West, we have this idea, and you can look at like the European stance towards the Russians. Okay, it's the same thing. All the Europeans are are the same way, and they can't tolerate any dissent. They can't tolerate any opposition to the worldview, because the worldview is literal reality. It's just like the truth. It's the baseline. Okay. And so in this way, we're always trapped. Okay, there's no such thing as being ideologically free, because even the desire to escape ideology becomes an ideological gesture. So Nietzsche saw this in philosophy's dream of pure truth. Okay, Lacan figured this out when he said that ideology is not what you think, it's what structures your desire. And you can't simply like opt out of ideology, because ideology is the very lens through which reality gives you coherence. Okay? But now, just because you're trapped in ideology doesn't mean you're helpless. It just means you can never be outside of the game. Okay? But you can learn the rules of the game, you can learn the blind spots, and you can recognize when common sense is not like a neutral thing, but is being used as a political weapon. And that's what separates the cynic from like the mindless drone, from the sleepwalker, right? A cynic knows that the system is false and still plays in the system because they know there is no outside of it. Okay, so why let's loop around as to like why ideologues just fall hard. Okay, like why it's bad to be an ideologue. Okay, the more someone ties their entire being into one ideology, then the more brittle you become, because you can't adapt, you can't see nuance, and you can't shift like frames. You can't take off the lenses of ideology that you have and put new ones on and then just try them out. So when an ideologue loses their ground, they don't lose the argument, they lose reality itself. So they lose their entire world. See, and then that brittleness makes them dangerous because it exposes them, right? So you have so let's look at like the Charlie Kirk thing, like the Charlie Kirk thing or the Ben Shapiro's or whatever. I can't think of good examples. Like right now, it's just the most recent one while I'm making the video, right? So these ideologies clash not on equal ground, but they get filtered through the global dominance of liberal democratic capitalism, right? And so you either become a martyr for your cause or an example of what happens when you resist the natural order. And so the question then is not whether you are trapped by ideology. You are. The question is, can you see it, or are you its puppet? Okay? So Israel is this very unique state in that, because Israel is how ideology cloaks itself as survival, morality, or destiny. Okay, and then anyone who's a mouthpiece of that, okay, they don't argue a position, but they frame reality itself so that even disagreement becomes absurd, dangerous, or evil. Okay, so in this way, Israel is not just a state; it's ideology. It's ideology incarnated. It is built on the narrative of eternal survival, chosen people exceptionalism, and the trauma of annihilation. Now, the trauma is real, but ideology weaponizes it. Everything becomes filtered through existence. So existence itself being at stake. Okay, so criticism isn't political; it's existential. To question Israel isn't to debate a policy; it is to flirt with genocide. That's how ideology shields itself. It fuses politics with life and death morality. And so Israel, in this way, it's strong in this like symbolic order, but it's extremely brittle in reality, because once you fuse your state to your sacred identity, any concession feels like betrayal, any compromise like suicide, and then the ideology doesn't allow balance. It only allows doubling down, right? So when someone else, like when an individual does that, they're not defending just like Israel or whatever the ideology is. It's as if the entire moral structure of the West is dependent on Israel's survival. So it's not that Israel isn't like one state amongst many. No, it's the front line of civilization, and without it, the West collapses. And that's ideology when it's most rigid, because the collapse of your cause equals to the collapse of meaning itself. Okay? And so you can never admit contradictions. You can't admit the hypocrisies, because that shatters your entire reality. Okay? And so when you embody an ideology, so, Kirk, Shapiro, anyone else, it doesn't matter, you stop being a person in the eyes of the world. You become a symbol. And then the symbols get targeted because they're useful so long as they reinforce that dominant frame of reality. But as soon as the winds of history shift, then symbols get destroyed brutally. Okay? This is why when the Europeans talk about Putin, they're not talking about like Russia, they're talking about Putin as the symbol for all of the things. Okay? So it's this like and this is the West's own trap of ideology. Okay? The more you fuse yourself to an ideology, the more the less freedom you have to maneuver. Okay? So So the system feeds itself and it consumes its defenders. So now there's this concept of the Ouroboros. And so the Ouroboros is an image of this, right? The Ouroboros is this idea of the snake eating itself. Okay, and I don't mean it as the sense of a symbol, as like the mystical symbol for eternal life. I'm talking about it as the symbol of ideology. Okay, so the Ouroboros is the idea of a system devouring itself to survive. And what does it feed on? It feeds on its own contradictions. It consumes its failures and turns them into proof of necessity, right? So Israel's a prime example of this, right? All violence committed generates more resistance, and then that resistance becomes the justification for more violence. And so then this ideology eats its own tail, right? Because it's like we fight because we're attacked, and we are attacked because we fight. And this cycle never ends because the very thing that threatens the system is what keeps the system alive, right? So it's constant creation of ideology. Okay. So in this way, ideology itself is this like self-sustaining Ouroboros. It doesn't need external proof. It creates its own, and then it strives not by resolving any contradictions, but by devouring them. Okay, and then the more absurd these contradictions become, the more ferociously it has to insist in this reality. So this is why ideologies don't collapse from argument; they collapse from exhaustion. And when the system finally eats too much of itself, then there's nothing left to sustain the cycle, and it dies. Okay? The Ouroboros shows us why you can't escape ideology entirely. You're caught in a loop of meaning that feeds itself. Now the question is like whether you can see that loop, like whether you can see the fact that you're eating your own flesh, or to like have the like awareness that you can't break that loop. Okay, so it gives you space to move, to choose whether you keep feeding it or whether you want to let it starve, right? So if Western liberal order is the most sophisticated Ouroboros in history. Okay, it doesn't just eat its own tail; it fattens it first, makes crises or crisis. I don't know what the plural of that is, and then it devours those crises to prove its own righteousness. Okay, so as an example of this, take terrorism. The West arms, trains, and destabilizes regions. You've got Afghanistan in the 80s, Iraq in 2003, Libya, Syria, wherever you want. Okay? Then the blowback arrives, and the blowback is insurgents, refugees, and extremist groups. So, ISIS is the creation of the United States because it's just a flowing forward of their policies in the Middle East before that. But instead of admitting the responsibility that they created it, they don't do that. They turn the crisis into proof of the system's necessity. Okay, so it goes, look at these monsters out there. Okay, we must defend freedom even harder because now look at these monsters, right? And so this crisis that it created now becomes what it consumes to keep it alive. Okay, let's take economics. You have capitalism, which generates obscene inequality, housing bubbles, financial collapses. But every single collapse is spun as evidence that we need more capitalism, we need more markets, we need more reforms. The failures of the system are metabolized as justification for expansion. So then you see this like the snake eating its own tail, right? The Ouroboros survives on consuming its tail. Okay, so this is the trick of the liberal order. It doesn't say we are one worldview among many. It says we are freedom itself, we are reason itself, we are humanity itself, which means that every alternative ideology isn't an opponent, it's branded as madness, barbarism, and extremism. And here's how it like twists. So those barbarisms are often direct offspring of liberal policies. Liberalism creates its enemies and then eats them to keep itself fed. So this is why the war on terror never ends. This is why the war on drugs never ends. This is why spreading democracy always destroys whatever place it went to institute democracy in. All right. So like the foreign interventions are justified by the by the chaos that they themselves caused. Okay. And then to bring it back to a more like psychoanalytic point. The reason that the West can't stop this is because it would reveal the emptiness at its core. Okay? It needs these enemies. And so this is the cost of the individuals. So the individuals are then sacrificial extensions of this constant need to keep eating itself. So they embody ideology so like the individuals then embody ideology so completely that they become a part of its digestive process. Okay, it's always the system folding back into itself, and so loyalty doesn't free them, like it doesn't free you. It ensures that you too will be devoured. Okay, now the thing with this is that. So this system, when it's created, is powerful, but it's also finite. Because once you continue to eat yourself, then you run out of yourself. Okay, so then you have whatever, climate breakdown, economic stagnation, pollution, multipolarity. The more the system feeds on the contradictions, the more the weaker it becomes. And because you can only spin propaganda for so long, until it runs out. And this is the fate of all ideology. It doesn't die because someone defeats it in debate. It dies when it consumes too much of itself, and then there's nothing left to consume.